It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening, albeit via Zoom and not in Parliament as we had hoped. Nevertheless, this does mean that we are able to welcome a huge number of attendees on the call, far beyond the number that any room in Parliament would have been able to accommodate. And it also means that we're able to be joined by a number of guests from around the world. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Siobhan McDonough and I'm the Member of Parliament for Mitcham and Morden in South London. I also have the honour of chairing the all-party parliamentary group for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And I'm pleased, therefore, to be able to welcome you, to everyone, to the launch of our report, Suffocation of the Faith, Persecution of Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan and the Rise of International Extremism. This report, the first of its kind, was commissioned against the backdrop of a shocking pattern of sustained persecution against Ahmadi Muslims, including killings, assault, tyranny, attacks on place of worship, hate campaigns, deprivation of jobs, and denial of education. As an all-party parliamentary group, we were horrified by the continued cases of persecution and hate brought to our attention, and so we decided to launch an inquiry into this hate, the first ever of its kind. Over the course of 5 sessions, our cross-party group heard evidence from right around the globe, receiving evidence and testimony in person and in writing. Though we had anticipated and feared the examples of hate that we heard and received, the scale of persecution and the personal experiences of the witnesses truly shocked us all. We heard from Ahmadi Muslims, academics, NGOs, religious communities, and even personal victim accounts themselves. We heard that the persecution remains greatest in Pakistan, but what is unique about the persecution of Ahmadis here is that it's state-sponsored and laws passed explicitly targeting Ahmadi Muslims. I cannot think of any parallel in the modern world for such persecution where a religious community has been denied by law the right to self-identify as Muslims. Such is the extent of persecution that it is no exaggeration to describe the life of an Ahmadi Muslim in Pakistan as one that faces persecution from the cradle to the grave. This must be of pressing concern to countries like the UK that have extensive links with Pakistan. And as a friend of Pakistan, surely we cannot simply ignore such brazen violation of human rights. The report also notes how the denial of freedom of religion for Ahmadi Muslims has also led to the denial of freedom of religion of other communities, such as Shia Muslims, Christians, and Hindus, all of whom continue to suffer from horrific attacks and persecution by extremists. But this hatred is not unique to Pakistan. This report finds the anti-Ahmadi persecution has spread internationally in countries like Indonesia, Algeria, Kazakhstan, and even in Bulgaria. Perhaps most worrying for the UK is that the report identified the overspill of hatred against Ahmadi Muslims to the UK. From vile attacks on social media, to bullying at schools, to the deprivation of employment opportunities, hatred against Ahmadi Muslims has reached the streets of Britain. This culminated in the senseless murder of Asad Shah in Glasgow in 2016 by a man motivated by what he saw in Pakistan. The recommendations in the report make it unequivocally clear that as an all-party parliamentary group, we demand the banning of such hate preachers from entering the UK and for hate online and on social media to have no hiding place. We cannot simply let the years roll on and allow such issues to be pushed back to be dealt with another time. No one should be discriminated because of their religious beliefs. Before I hand over to the first speaker, I'd like to finish by thanking all those who have been involved in the production of this report. The cross-party MPs and peers who heard evidence throughout the inquiry, those giving evidence who were brave enough to come forward and speak honestly and movingly. And finally, to the members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community who tirelessly fight for freedom of religion, has encouraged our all-party parliamentary group to prepare and launch this imperative report. And so without further ado, I'd like to hear from Farid Ahmed, the National Secretary for External Affairs of the Ahmadi Muslim Community UK. He will read out a message from His Holiness, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmed, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyyan Muslim community. Farid.
Thank you, Siobhan. This is a special message from His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmed, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, for the launch of the All-Party Parliamentary Group report. His Holiness says, I am pleased to learn that the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has completed its report on human rights and religious freedom, and it is now being officially launched. Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan have been persecuted and victimized in Pakistan for many decades. To cite a very recent example, last week, dozens of gravestones of Ahmadi Muslims were demolished by religious extremists in a village in Pakistan after extremist clerics had complained that the gravestones contained Islamic terminology. All of this was done in the presence of members of the local police. Where such vile acts are targeting Ahmadi Muslims and the perpetual denial of our religious freedom are a means of grief to us, we also believe it has a wider impact on society at large. Paramount to the success and progress of any nation is the principle of non-discrimination, and only those societies can truly progress in which all citizens are treated equally. Certainly, this was the noble vision laid out by the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and remains the true pathway to peace in any nation or society. In terms of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we will always respond to persecution we face with patience and by turning to God Almighty in prayer. We do not seek any special treatment or favors. Rather, our only desire is for the people of all faiths and beliefs to live side by side in peace and harmony, as taught by the Holy Quran, which unequivocally states there should be no compulsion in religion. Chapter 2, verse 257. Furthermore, during his life, the Holy Founder of Islam, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, set a timeless and unparalleled example of religious freedom and plurality. Upon being elected as the head of state in Medina, he pronounced that every person was free to practice their faith and beliefs without fear of persecution or injustice. Consequently, it is our contention that freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, and true justice are the cornerstones for peace in all parts of the world. In light of this, I am extremely appreciative of the fact that the report you are launching today calls for religious freedom for all people, irrespective of their caste, creed, or color. Certainly, in the struggle for universal human rights, we stand shoulder to shoulder with all those who seek to help the victims of injustice and oppression. Despite the persecution we face in Pakistan and the myriad of restrictions placed upon us, Ahmadi Muslims continue to serve the nation with the spirit of love and selflessness and devotion, as loyalty to one's nation is an inherent part of Islamic faith. For example, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Pakistan has established many humanitarian projects and programs in order to serve the underprivileged and the vulnerable members of society. We earnestly desire for Pakistan to prosper and to succeed. Indeed, we want all countries to flourish, and to achieve this, the human rights of all people must be upheld and protected. Every nation and every individual must play their role in the cause of peace, so that the world we bequeath to our children and future generations is a world of peace and prosperity. Finally, I wish to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to all members of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for your continued support and efforts. I pray that the launch of the report is successful and blessed in all respects, and may it fulfill its objectives. May Allah the Almighty bless you all for your efforts and services in the cause of peace. Ameen. With best wishes and prayers, yours sincerely, Mirza Masroor Ahmed, Khalifatul Masih V, head of the worldwide Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Thank you, Farid, and please extend our thanks to His Holiness for his message of support. We now turn to Jim Shannon, MP. Jim serves as the co-chair of the APPG for Freedom of Religion, or belief and recently visited Pakistan to represent concerns on religious persecution. Jim will speak on anti-Ahmadi laws and the need for their repeal. Jim.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and all other right honourable members for asking me to participate in this important meeting. I take it very much as an honour and also as a privilege to be speaking at such an event. First of all, I would like to congratulate all those who were involved in producing the amazing report, and very encouraged by that and the efforts and the commitment that's been given. As chair of the all-party parliamentary group for freedom of religion or belief, and the APPG as well for Pakistan minorities, I know just how much work goes into producing reports like this, and I want to congratulate everyone involved. The report is incredibly detailed, is an excellent source of information for anyone who cares about forward issues or the Ahmadi community. It successfully brings together information from an extremely wide array of resources, shines a light on an issue that's too often neglected, particularly in Pakistan. And I can recall well, I see Lord Alton here as well, and David and I and Mary Rimmer and others travelled to Pakistan in 2018 to discuss issues of freedom of religion or belief with government representatives, with civil society organisations, with lawyers, academics, and many other groups. A very profitable time to be there. And one thing that particularly struck me during this trip is that there was a willingness to openly discuss the persecution of Christians, Shia Muslims, the Humanists, the Hindus, and other minority groups. But the topic of the persecution of Ahmadis was one that was greeted with discomfort, with avoidance, and sometimes even aggression. In fact, on more than one occasion, we were specifically advised to not mention the plight of the Ahmadiyya community at all if we wanted to have productive meetings. This is extremely concerning. The hostility is a result of a decades-long campaign to demonize Ahmadis in society, a campaign which even utilizes Pakistan's constitution excuse me, and penal code. Indeed, there's evidence that the ambiguous, arbitrary, and problematic nature of anti-Ahmadi laws has emboldened non-state actors and extremists to harass, attack, and kill Ahmadis. Disgraceful. As the report highlights, Ahmadis are routinely arbitrarily arrested, have even been subjected to vicious attacks in public, including having acid thrown at them. Hundreds of Ahmadis have faced extrajudicial executions by vigilante groups and have been murdered for following their faith. Ahmadis are also discriminated against in education and employment, and blasphemy laws are widely misused to settle personal scores and to persecute Ahmadis, but also members of other religious and non-religious groups. Of course, blasphemy laws are not the only means through which religious and belief minorities in Pakistan suffer persecution. From denial of education and work opportunities to stigmatizing content in school curricula and textbooks, the discrimination, the persecution, the intimidation, and the victimization of minority groups is a major issue Pakistan must, and I believe needs, to address urgently, not only to meet its international human rights obligations because it's the right thing to do, which I know of course it is, but also because protecting freedom of religious belief is strongly correlated with reduced conflicts in societies and prosperity. Just think of all the potential and all the talent that Pakistan is not making use of because of needless discrimination. And we're seeing examples of that nearly every day. For example, Atif Main, a Princeton professor and one of the world's leading economists, was asked to step down from the Pakistan government's Economic Advisory Council because he was an Ahmadi. Disgraceful and absolutely unheard of. This is just one example of how hostility towards minorities limits the pool of expertise and energy that Pakistan can call upon and negatively impacts Pakistan's future and its image internationally. It's time for Pakistan to make the changes. And I conclude with this. That is why I'm extremely grateful for the work of the APPG, the Ahmadiyya community, and the efforts that they have made and you have made, Madam Chair, and your APPG has made as well, and everyone has been involved to create this report and to champion the cause of minorities in Pakistan. We need to all work together collectively to speak out, to be a voice for the voiceless, and to push the Pakistani government to repeal blasphemy laws for the good of the country, and so that all Pakistan citizens can live free. Freedom, liberty, and protection of their human rights. Is it too much to ask for? I don't believe so. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Jim. That was really informative. And we now, our next speaker, we'll hear from Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy was previously served as the Foreign Secretary, and during his time in office, he commissioned the Bishop of Truro's independent review on persecuted Christians. Jeremy is a member of the APPG and will speak on the denial of voting rights of Ahmadi Muslims, as well as those facing death row. Jeremy.
Thank you, Siobhan. And I've really got 3 brief points that I wanted to make, but thank you for inviting me. And what I really wanted to say is, first of all, I think this report is incredibly important in righting a terrible wrong, which is that all of us, and I suspect nearly every member of the House of Commons, have heard of Asia Bibi, the Christian lady who faced blasphemy charges and in the end happily was able to escape the death penalty and get to Canada. But there are 3 Asia Bibis in the Ahmadi community at the moment, 3 people on blasphemy charges who very few people have heard about. And I think it's really important that we bang the drum for all persecution of religious minorities, whether it's the 250 million Christians persecuted for their faith worldwide that the Bishop of Truro's report highlighted so importantly, but also smaller communities like the Ahmadi community, where the worry and the agony and the injustice is every bit as real. And I think that's why this is a very important moment. And I think the best evidence of how things can be, for me, is looking at the wonderful way that the Ahmadis have integrated in my own constituency at Islamabad in Tilford. And what you see there is people who are model citizens, are an absolute joy to everyone they come across. And I don't think this is a division bell in case anyone can hear it. It's always been a huge pleasure for me to interact with Mr. Shams. And of course, the biggest honour of all was having His Holiness to come and live in my constituency. So that, I think, is an example of the Ahmadi philosophy in action: love for all, hatred for none. And it is a great privilege to have you living in Southwest Surrey. And the final point I wanted to make was just to echo something in the message that we heard read out from His Holiness earlier about why freedom of belief matters. And it is because fundamentally, if you have societies which allow freedom of belief, you have a society that puts a value on tolerance. And that is, in the end, how we prevent wars and conflicts. And so we, as political leaders in Westminster, need to think about this very hard, because one of the positive things in the world over the last 75 years, since the end of the Second World War, has been a significant increase in the number of democracies around the world. And all of us welcome that. But one of the dangers in democracy is that you can sometimes have populist leaders who realize that it can be an effective way to win votes to set one community, one race, one faith against another. And as Westminster parliamentarians, working in a building that, for all our many faults that we're very good at broadcasting to the whole world, is still seen by many people as the mother of parliaments, we have influence on our colleagues. We see people in the Pakistani parliament, the Indian parliament, US Congress. We have the opportunity to bang the drum for tolerance and for using the power that elected politicians have not to make the wrong call and to divide people in election processes. And I think that is particularly important with the Pakistani government, because I met the new Pakistani government many occasions, and I think their heart is in the right place. They want to do the right thing, but they need a lot of encouragement. They are very nervous about offending the hyper-religious parts of Pakistani population. And they need that pushing and that prodding and that support from everyone, but not least British parliamentarians. So thank you, Siobhan, for all you're doing. Thank you to everyone for their work on the all-party group. And let's continue to fight the good fight together.
Thank you, Jeremy. Our next speaker is Ambassador Sam Brownback. Mr. Brownback was a former senator and governor of Kansas, and I understand that he's currently US Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Sam, if I can call you that, we're delighted to have you here.
Pleasure to join you. It's just a delight. Being a Midwesterner, I love the British accent, so it's kind of fun to listen to you. This
is South London.
Well, okay, I'll get it right. But it's a pleasure to join you, and thanks for the APPG doing this. I've worked with the Ahmadi community for some period of time, all the time that I've been in this job, and then prior when I was in the Senate. It's just one of those strange groups that's persecuted. It's a group that practice their faith peacefully. They seek to contribute to the society, and then they're persecuted. And you just, it's hard to understand, really. It's hard to believe. And it hurts a society, it hurts a country when they are persecuted. Also, while he's still on the line, I want to thank Jeremy Hunt during his foreign ministry when he did the Bishop of Turo's report. That was an outstanding report that's really been helpful around the world on highlighting the persecution of Christians, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa. But I think it got another set of voices out there on the issue of religious freedom. And the issue is for everybody's religious freedom everywhere all the time. And that if we want to get past this phase of religious nationalism that we've got going on so much in the world, that's spawning a lot of conflict and violence and deaths, we've got to guarantee each other's religious freedom, and we have to not only tolerate, we have to respect and even really love each other's search for God and their faith. That's the way the world has to move forward, or we're going to have a lot of conflicts in the world. We're going to have a lot of people jailed or oppressed, and we're going to have a lot more violence and death. Because this religious nationalism doesn't know particular boundaries any place around the world. It is a useful populist tool, but it's harmful to a country, to a people. It's harmful to the minority groups. It's harmful to the majority. And I think we, particularly in Western democracies, have to be bold and aggressive in standing up for these religious freedoms for everybody. And you have this classic example of the Ahmadi community, particularly in Pakistan, but also in many other Muslim majority countries in particular, that they get persecuted, they get thrown into jail, they get accused of blasphemy, they get death penalty. And then that's in the officialdom. In the community and the communal violence, and oftentimes is even greater. And they don't have a respect there, and they can be persecuted, thrown out of their homes, and even killed. That's taking place, and we hear these reports and we get them often. So I'm delighted that the British Parliament is standing up for this. The APPG is highlighting this in their report. We'll certainly be looking at that report. We look forward to working with you till we all have this universal human right, this right of freedom of religion, freedom of belief. We've got an alliance now of nations, 29 nations. The UK is one of the major members and pushing this. Raymond Chistey is the parliamentarian that's in the group, does a fabulous job, very active, very engaged. And this is, I really believe, this is one of the key things the world has to get right, and we have to get it right now. And I think we have to stand up to countries like China that's persecuting the Uyghurs, that are a dominantly Muslim group. You got 1 million in concentration camps. We just really can't tolerate this, and the world will be a better place as we have this religious freedom and respect for all. So we want to stand with the Ahmadi community, and we do. We'll continue to. We look forward to working with our UK allies in this fundamental human right. and count us on your team and working with you. God bless you all, and appreciate the chance to share with you.
Thank you ever so much, Sam, and thank you for your support and your kind words. I mean, anybody who watched the Andrew Marr show on Sunday morning and the interview with the Chinese ambassador will be very shocked at what they heard and what they saw. Our next speaker is a very strong member, supporter of the APPG. We will now hear from Sir Ed Davey, MP. Sir Ed is the acting leader of the Liberal Democrat Party and vice chair of the APPG. He will speak on the education curricula in Pakistan, the aid funding provided by the UK government for education projects, and its link to human rights. Sir Ed.
Thank you, Siobhan, and can I thank Farid for his message from His Holiness, and also Rafiq Hayat, the National President, for his presence today at this important event. Before I turn to events in Pakistan, I do want to put in context the work of the APPG, particularly the work of Siobhan leading it, but the cross-party work that set up this review and why we did it, and where I think we should go with this report. When we set it up, it was soon after the beginning of the last Parliament in 2017, when many of us felt that in order to get traction in Britain and around the world, we needed an authoritative report that was clearly independent, was clearly well researched, to bring all the evidence that we'd seen both in our constituencies, from our constituents, and from people who had discussed this over the years, bring it together so we could both educate ourselves as parliamentarians, raise awareness in Parliament more broadly, and through an authoritative independent report, raise awareness across the public. And I think we've begun the first two of those, raising awareness in Parliament, educating ourselves, but the stories we heard through taking evidence and the sheer compelling nature of this report's findings, I hope means that we can get a wider audience to understand what is going on in Pakistan, that state-sponsored persecution of religion, particularly Ahmadi Muslims, is happening on a daily basis, with some of the most appalling consequences, people being killed and people's lives being made extraordinarily difficult on a daily basis. So I do hope that on the launch of this report, we can ensure that the British media do cover it and do reveal what is happening in Pakistan. And I think that's important, not just in the British media, but frankly around the world. We need to make sure that the Pakistani government realize that people are watching them. People do care about Ahmadi Muslims, and indeed all the other religious groups who are being persecuted in Pakistan, and we're not going to stand idly by. Which brings me to where I hope we will as an APPG go from this report, and it relates to education in Pakistan and the way the curricula is completely discriminated and inaccurate and quite outrageously put together, and how it relates to the UK support for Pakistan. And I think the British government needs to receive the support formally from the APPG, and it's particularly helpful to have Jeremy here today so he can assist in that process. So that we ask the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the government, and even the Prime Minister, what is the government's response to this powerful report? What are they going to do with respect to the aid budget for schools and books that are abused? And what is their policy to Pakistan more broadly? What are they going to do to try, yes, sensitively and diplomatically, but determinedly and persistently, to stand up against this religious persecution? And we all know in diplomatic space there are ways of doing that, but it can't be washed under the carpet. As the ambassador says, we see the persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in West China, and now the world standing up for that. I've often feared that if we don't take action, the persecution against Ahmadi Muslims and other religious minorities in Pakistan will just get worse. So we have to stand up, and we have to use this moment of this report to do that. So I hope the APPG will formally present this to the government and ask for a full and comprehensive response. How will this impact the foreign policy position of the government? But I'd also, because I believe we need to be taking action, and this is my final point, I think we also need to show that we're looking after individual Ahmadi Muslims who've been persecuted. And there are a significant number of Ahmadi Muslims in UN refugee camps in Thailand and other places where they have fled this appalling persecution, but they're currently without a future. They're in limbo. And given the UK is part of these UN resettlement schemes, refugee resettlement schemes, and the UK, I believe, will respond to this report with some degree of shock, I hope the APPG can use this report with the Home Secretary to urge her to ensure that individual Ahmadi Muslims escaping this persecution, detailed in this report, are given the chance to come to this country. And I think we should work with the Ahmadi Muslim community here in our country, which is so fantastic, such a fantastic contribution to our nation's life, that we work with them to identify a number of Ahmadi Muslims who can come to this country and not just escape persecution, but escape persecution and the limbo that they've been left in, so they can lead their lives properly. So thank you for coming to this, all those who contributed, my colleagues on the APPG, and I hope from the publication of this report we can take really proactive, concrete steps. So this report doesn't gather dust, but it is a catalyst for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Our next speaker is Shahbaz Taseer. Shahbaz's evidence to the inquiry had a profound effect on me personally and all those who heard his evidence. So we're very grateful that he is here this evening as well. Shahbaz is a Pakistani businessman and the son of the former governor of Punjab, Mr. Salman Taseer, assassinated by his own bodyguard for campaigning on the repeal of blasphemy laws. Shahbaz will speak on the Pakistan government and the role of clerics in instigating hate speech and violence. Shahbaz.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Firstly, thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity again to speak. It's an honor to be amongst such distinguished guests, and thank you so much. This is an honor for me. And I'd just like to start off saying that the work that this report is doing and that this organization is doing, the kind of intolerance, the kind of odds that they're against, I think that the work that they're doing is highly commendable. And it's extremely important, I think, for people to not only just support, but also to listen and understand how important this matter really is. Because it's not just targeting one segment of Pakistan's community. It's actually, it can affect anyone at any time. And my own father, Shaheed Salman Taseer, he was the governor of Punjab, and he was assassinated by his bodyguard in the capital of Pakistan in broad daylight for standing up for a poor Christian woman who was falsely accused of blasphemy. And she spent 11 years in solitary confinement. I myself have been kidnapped by religious extremists, and I've spent years in solitary confinement. And I cannot understand what, against one's will, but to be falsely accused and to spend 11 years inside a system's barbaric, draconian laws is shameful. And she is one of thousands. She's very lucky as she managed to get out of this country. But there are thousands of people in Pakistan today that every single day are being persecuted because of their faith and because of these draconian laws inside Pakistan. And there are thousands more, by the way, that suffer in silence, complete silence, because they're victims of persecution, they're victims of intolerance. And the laws in this country, the way that society looks at, by the way, this is now becoming a much broader issue than just laws. It's also about how people view it. It goes with impunity. There is absolutely no answer for the kind of atrocities that are taking place. Members of this community are killed inside their places of worship. No answers from anyone. Pakistanis, in order to get a passport, have to declare that they have nothing to do with Islam, which I think in the 21st century is such a shameful conversation to have, let alone 200 million people, if any of them require a passport document, is subjected to having to sign up for something like this, which makes us all party to this persecution. Whether it's one of our Nobel laureates who we cannot celebrate, it is a danger to celebrate Dr. Abdul Salam in Pakistan. And what's even worse is that if you stand up against this intolerance, if you speak against this intolerance inside this country, there is you are putting your life at risk. So when we speak of the clerics in this country, they just because my father asked that these laws should be revisited, they are made by man, they are passed by the Parliament of Pakistan, and they should be looked at again, because the truth is that they were passed by a dictator. And just for saying something so simple, and just for wanting to stand up for the most underprivileged of Pakistani society, he was assassinated, he was murdered in cold blood, and his killer was celebrated. And the same clerics that celebrated his killer have protested successfully or unsuccessfully inside the capital many times. They've all been given deals, or they haven't been given deals, but they still roam freely and they still influence freely, which is something that for someone like me who lives in this country, who has been a victim of this intolerance, it's something very worrying, because it targets you despite your religion. You can be Christian, you can be Ahmadi, you can be Sunni, you can be Shia, you can be a member of any community. It just depends on what you say before these laws can target you. And in most cases, you end up dead or in prison or in exile. And I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but I would like to say in the end that as someone who has suffered because of this extremist mindset myself, it is a mindset. It is a barbaric mindset. It is illiteracy that they use to manipulate, that they use to systematically, through generations, pass on hate, because really that's the foundation of their message. And globally, as human beings, it is very important for us to see, just take a step back and notice what kind of intolerance and extremism, whether it's religious or political, it's on the rise. People are getting elected using this rhetoric. They consider it popular rhetoric to incite hate against people. And you can be a minority anywhere, you can be a majority anywhere. And that is the tragedy with hate. It can target you anywhere. It is a mindset. And this mindset is our enemy. And so I believe, and I am so grateful that you've invited me to speak here, because really, if you have a voice, you must speak for the voiceless. You must use whatever privilege you have for having that voice, and you must speak for what is right. And thank
you, Shahbaz. That is really, really moving, and we thank you so much for giving us your time and being here and addressing the event. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll now hear from John Pontifex. John is the head of press and information at the human rights NGO Aid to the Church in Need. John contributed to the APPG inquiry hearings with harrowing accounts of persecution faced by Christians in Pakistan. He will speak on the persecution of other religious communities in Pakistan. John.
Thank you very much indeed, Siobhan. And it's really wonderful and a great honour to be able to speak at this launch of such an important and very timely report, and indeed to follow on from Shahbaz Taseer, whose father, Salman, gave his life for the cause of religious freedom, is also a very particular honour as well. In my work with the charity Aid to the Church in Need, I have travelled to Pakistan a number of times, and indeed was due to go there just as lockdown began, and sadly was unable to complete my trip. And I have met a number of people forced into hiding as a result of false blasphemy accusations. I've spoken to others who've shown me literally the scars of religious hatred carried out against them. I have visited churches set ablaze as a result of acts of persecution, and I've spent a number of hours with bishops and church leaders who have spoken sometimes with tears in their eyes about the struggle of trying to bring peace, trying to bring harmony, trying to bring hope to communities constantly under threat of daily persecution. And it's important to highlight that it by no means is this violence and contempt heaped on just one faith community alone. The persecution of Ahmadi Muslims is especially egregious. But what is really important in this report, as well as highlighting that, is that it makes repeated references to the many, many other faith communities in Pakistan who so often live in fear because of their beliefs. And what we can see in a certain way is that the persecution of Ahmadi Muslims has spawned a wider contempt for minority faith groups in general. And as the editor-in-chief of Aid to the Church Needs biennial Religious Freedom in the World report, we have plotted the decline of this religious freedom for the many, many faith communities affected. And from that report, we can state, for example, the attacks on Shia Muslims. And I think particularly of the attacks on 100 Shia Muslims from the Hazara ethnic minority group who were targeted by the Lashkar-e-Jangvi Balochistan militant group. And earlier this month, Aid to the Church in Need, we were in touch with the National Commission for Justice and Peace in Pakistan, who highlighted how Hindus were being pressured into stopping construction work on their new temple in the capital, Islamabad. The Hindu Panchayat Association has reported that every year, nearly 1,000 Christian and Hindu girls and young women in the province of Sindh are abducted, forced into marriages, and pressured into abandoning their faith. And at Aid to the Church in Need, we've been very closely in contact with one such family affected, Nikat Shahbaz, the mother of Mara Shahbaz, a 14-year-old Christian girl, Catholic girl, who was abducted, forced into marriage, forced to abandon her faith, and all this during lockdown. And this is one of countless cases that we're hearing. They don't just affect Christians, and they don't just affect individuals in one particular province. And I spoke to the mother, Nikat, only a couple of weeks ago, and she had tears in her eyes as she begged me personally to do what I can to help get her daughter free. It's right to remember Asia Bibi. She had to wait nearly a decade or more to win back her freedom after being falsely accused of blasphemy, and for so doing was on death row. And we understand there are 1,000 or more people on death row for blasphemy. And if minorities are to regain their freedom, and if Pakistan is at last to realize the vision of tolerance set out by its founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the road to recovery has to begin with a recognition of where we are today. So this report is a very important wake-up call, helping to break down myths and speak truth to power. People of all faiths and none stand to lose for failing to take notice. Unchecked, persecution simply breeds like the coronavirus. Nobody is immune. As this report so rightly makes clear on its title page, nothing can change until we together act to end the suffocation of the faithful. Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you to all those involved in this wonderful report.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Sir Iftikhar Ayaz. Sir Iftikhar is the ambassador of Tuvalu. He also serves as the chair of the International Human Rights Committee, an NGO campaigning on freedom of religion. He will speak on the international aspect of persecution faced by Ahmadi Muslims and the refugee crisis.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Honorable Chairperson, thank you for this opportunity. Congratulations to all on this fantastic achievement. I'm sure this report, together with the fact-finding reports already published by the International Human Rights Committee, will generate the support and action desired by all of us. The persecution of religious communities in Pakistan and elsewhere is a threat to all of us, to the whole world. When religion is falsely and maliciously used to create heinous misconceptions, to produce hate and spread fear, every nation suffers and every faith suffers. This has been going on unchecked in Pakistan for decades. And now the government has entrusted, particularly the government of Punjab, has entrusted the development of curriculum and textbooks to the clergy to ensure that this spiteful, malignant practice continues into the coming generations. Unfortunately, this is part of the country's development program financed by the UK. And Sir Ed Davey rightly pointed out that this is something which should be taken up by APPG and questioned why there is no influence on such policies of Pakistan. In addition to Pakistan, where just this week, the graves of 67 Muslims were desecrated, Ahmadis face persecution also internationally in Indonesia, Algeria, and Bangladesh. I would particularly like to cite a recent very, very disturbing incident in Bangladesh. Just a few days ago, a baby girl in Bangladesh who was just 3 days old sadly died. Her parents, distraught and upset at their loss, did what no parent should have to do. They buried their daughter. Not a few hours had passed when extremists, having incited an affray, dug up the body of the child and cold-bloodedly threw the corpse on the street. How awful, horrible. The dead child's crime was that it was an Ahmadi Muslim child who had been buried in cemetery for Muslims. Police in attendance made no arrests. Instead, they instructed the parents of the child to fetch the body from the street and bury it elsewhere. Shameful. Such persecution, which targets every aspect of an Ahmadi Muslim's existence, creates an intolerable environment for Ahmadis, not only in Pakistan, but in some other countries as well. And that is solely because of their faith. They are not free to live in these countries in life, nor are they allowed to be at peace in death. Tens of thousands of Ahmadis have fled Pakistan and other countries, having been persecuted because of their peaceful religious beliefs. They have left their homes, their jobs, in many cases, their families. Now they seek international protection in Malaysia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, as well as the Philippines, Hong Kong, China, South Korea, and other places in the Far East. More than 8,000 of them dwell in these countries without certainty, without any hope they can hold for their future, for the future of their children, for the future of their families. That is because the international protection they seek comes at a lethargic rate. The UNHCR is faced with increasing challenges, both in terms of financial support and practical assistance from member nations. And that is where APPG can surely play a role to try and speed up the settlement of these people stuck in refugee camps and in very meager accommodation where they can afford it, without a stipend from the UNHCR and without the right to work or access to education for their children. Some refugees spend years in tortuous limbo. They are neither afforded the right to remain permanently in the countries in which they seek refuge, nor are many of them resettled. The pace at which they are resettled is very, very disappointing.
You are so right, Sir Iftikhar. We'd like to really thank you for your contribution and raising that point. We'll now hear from Fiyaz Mughal. Fiyaz is the founder and director of Faith Matters, an NGO which works on challenging extremism and developing platforms for discourse and interaction between faith communities right across the UK. Fiyaz will speak on the role of hate preachers in spreading anti-Ahmadi sentiment in the UK. Fiyaz.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. I just wanted to pick up on 4 key points here, really. The key points being that we need to be clear that there is an impact on the United Kingdom, and particularly within communities of Pakistani heritage, regarding what happens in Pakistan. It's something that I've always watched, and it's something that I've kept a track of. And the reality is that when there are major issues that take place in Pakistan at a political level, there are ramifications and there are significant changes here in the way Ahmadis are discriminated, even in our country. So a report that will come out later in the next few months is an area around local authorities and how local authorities in our country have been influenced by people who have a prejudice against Ahmadi communities to literally bar them from entering and being part of SACRE groups, the Standing Advisory Council groups that basically are there to provide advice and information on how religious educational literacy is provided in our country. And we have examples of where local authorities are being influenced, particularly officers are being influenced, sometimes by councillors who carry with them the prejudice baggage that comes from Pakistan, and who are then saying to local authority officers, please do not regard them as Muslims, i.e. Ahmadis as Muslims. Quote, they are heretics. They are not respected in Muslim communities. They can't be on sacred councils. We have prime examples of that, where bigotry is in effect being imported into our country, and where local authority officers are bypassing equalities laws to allow this bigotry to permeate and in effect reject Ahmadis from even sitting on the most basic councils in local authorities, i.e. sacred councils. So it's a shame that even local authority resources are being used in our country to, in effect, marginalize members of a very tiny minority in our country. And the question I say to these local authorities who will be listed in the report is, you are not just an embarrassment. The fact is, those councillors who are telling you that Ahmadis should be persecuted and prejudiced against need to be named and shamed. It is as simple as that. If you are a councillor and you are taking public monies to be a councillor and you are attempting to represent communities in your local area, you have no right spreading prejudice and bigotry against other local communities in your area. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we have also noticed a substantive amount of extremism in our country around the activity of people like Qadim Hussain Rizvi, who has been an extremist preacher in Pakistan, who has literally held the Pakistani state to, in effect, hostage. Now, let me explain this. When Tanveer Ahmed, the killer of Asad Shah, decided that he was going to drive in his vehicle from the north of England to go and stab Asad Shah over 20 times on a street in Glasgow, his videos, or rather his audio, was put out by Qadim Hussain Rizvi. His audio was put out by Qadim Hussain Rizvi, this extremist cleric who has a significant following in Pakistan. His audio was put out in Pakistan on channels and on social media channels when Tanveer Ahmed was in Barlini prison. So the question is, how did an extremist who murders a British citizen on the streets of Glasgow just for having alternative views and who happens to be Ahmadi, how did his audio get out of one of the most high security prisons, Barlini prison, to end up in Pakistan in the hands of an extremist called Qadim Hussain Rizvi, who was playing these audio tapes, in effect knowing that that extremism would permeate into Pakistani communities here in the UK. So now you see a clear link to extremism. And I have been one of those individuals who has always said that anti-Ahmadi rhetoric, anti-Ahmadi prejudice is very closely linked to extremist rhetoric and extremist behavior. You should not delineate the two. Anti-Ahmadi rhetoric and prejudice, we have prime examples in this report, this APPG report, of people being killed. Extremism is the marginalization of individuals, the dehumanization of individuals, and the targeting of individuals because of political rhetoric, sometimes interlinked with religious extremist views. How is this different? It is not. And so the reality is the extremism and poison of Pakistan is percolating into sections of communities of Pakistani heritage who are picking this up. And the last thing I want to say is, I give an example. When Atif Mian, the individual who was appointed by Imran Khan to sit on the National Commission for Minorities, Atif Mian, an Ahmadi, was appointed to sit by Imran Khan, a really positive decision by the Prime Minister to make a difference, to show a symbolic desire to place the Ahmadi community with equal rights. There were huge demonstrations in Pakistan, again, led by people like Qadim Hussain Rizvi, that effectively held the country to hostage. But what I found were mainstream imams in the UK on Pakistani cable television, effectively calling out for the discrimination of Ahmadis and asking for Imran Khan to kick off Atif Mian from a National Commission for Minorities. These are imams enjoying the values of the United Kingdom, enjoying the pluralism of our society, enjoying being a Muslim in the United Kingdom, but discriminating against other Muslims in Pakistan. I mean, how obscene can you get? Because if I can question those imams, and I, for example, said to them, what do you think of Islamophobia? You'd have them jumping up and down outside saying Islamophobia is terrible. But then they carry out Islamophobia against other Muslims in Pakistan, and the sheer hypocrisy stinks. And these are quite mainstream imams. I'll finish with this, Siobhan. Quite mainstream imams who have audiences of over 3,000 to 5,000 in their mosques. So I finish off by saying this, that this for me, as a British Muslim, is an endemic problem of prejudice and bigotry interspersed with violent extremism at points. We have an example. Assad Shah is an example. If there was no example, I'd say, actually, we haven't seen violent extremism. We have it interspersed. And as I say to police forces up and down the country, I say there are some indicators of looking for extremism. One is anti-Shia rhetoric, another is anti-Ahmadiyya rhetoric. When you see it, you will closely see aligned with it Islamist, extremist mentality, and sometimes Al-Qaeda and IS Islamist extremism. They are interspersed at points. And so we need to be very, very clear that we target this hatred with the resources we have. And as Sarah Khan is going to mention, her work also raises the anti-Ahmadi bigotry and its links with extremism. We need to keep shouting out about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiyaz. That was a tour de force. Thank you. We'll now hear, as you said, from Sarah Khan. Sarah was appointed by the Home Secretary to lead the Commission for Countering Extremism. The Commission for Countering Extremism is an independent body, and its mission is to help everyone do more to challenge all forms of extremism. Sarah will speak on the wider impact of anti-Ahmadi hate and its contributing role to extremism in the UK. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you to the APPG for inviting me to speak today, but also for producing such a detailed, timely and important report. I want to focus absolutely on what you've highlighted in the report, which is the overspill of anti-Ahmadiyya extremism from Pakistan into Britain. And as Commissioner, I've seen both in a professional and a personal level the horrific nature of anti-Ahmadiyya extremism. Our report, Challenging Hateful Extremism, which we published in October last year, highlighted some of that extremism in Britain, which Fiyaz has touched on, from boycotting Ahmadi businesses, to the bullying of Ahmadiyya children in our schools, to local sakras denying Ahmadiyyas and becoming members, and in the worst cases calling for the deaths of Ahmadiyyas. And there's no doubt in my mind that such a behaviour meets my Commission's definition of what we call hateful extremism. And it's a definition we're actually calling on the British government to adopt and to build a strategy in countering. And we identify hateful extremism as behaviours which incite and amplify hate, or engage in persistent hatred, or make the moral case on justification for violence, and which clearly draw on hateful, hostile, or supremacist views at an out-group, and which causes harm to our society. And so, you know, as a British citizen, as a British Muslim, I'm proud that our country, Britain, seeks to uphold and defend the rights of everyone in our country, regardless of race, sex, religion, or belief. And Britain is an inclusive, plural and democratic country which promotes freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression and the rights of minorities. Hateful extremism, as I've seen, is the very opposite of all of these values. And when we don't stand up for these rights, we in effect allow extremism to flourish. The symbiotic relationship, or this cycle, between our democratic principles and extremism is key here. When extremism thrives, these values and freedoms I just talked about are further eroded and undermined. But equally, when we don't stand up for these values and freedoms, extremism gains ground. And that is why inaction in the face of extremism can never, ever be a response. But what I have to say, what I found particularly shocking, and again, Fiyaz touched on this, is when public bodies, local authorities, or even councillors have often caved into the demands of some Muslims in Britain who engage in anti-Ahmadiyya hatred and who do not support Ahmadiyya's right to freedom of religion. And so while rightly highlighting the problems of Islamophobia in our country, I have seen how some Muslims themselves engage in anti-Muslim hatred against Ahmadiyyas. And this is just utterly unacceptable, and I'm afraid reeks of hypocrisy. Well-meaning public authorities have sometimes demonstrated muddled thinking. By trying to meet the demands of one religious minority group, they have sometimes ended up denying the rights of another religious minority group, and in this case, Ahmadiyya Muslims. And it is, of course, not the job of public authorities to become entangled in religious debates, but it's absolutely their job to uphold the public sector equality duty. And that is why the Commission's work on hateful extremism is really important. I think for too long there has been an incoherent understanding and definition of extremism. I believe the government's current definition is not helpful. It's too broad, it's unfocused, and at times confusing. And as the only person in our country to have reviewed the government's counter-extremism strategy, I have called for an urgent and complete overhaul. A new strategy on countering hateful extremism, which would mean addressing some of the recommendations made by the APPG, banning anti-Ahmadiyya hateful extremism online, banning hate preachers from entering the UK. But it will also mean we respond more proactively to those perpetrators who are engaged in inciting religious hatred against the Ahmadiyyas. And I'm concerned that there are gaps in our legislation in relation to hateful extremism, which is why my commission is currently conducting a legal review. And we're also calling on the government to ensure that its online harms bill also, and it must include hateful extremism, otherwise this will be a missed opportunity. So I'd like to end by saying that I hope everyone who's taking part on this webinar today, who care passionately about the universality of human rights and the dignity of each and every human being, and the right of Ahmadiyya Muslims to be able to live peacefully in our country without fear or stigmatization, can play their part in lobbying our government to adopt the Commission's recommendations on hateful extremism and to work to counter it. Extremism is, without a doubt, one of the challenges of our time. It threatens who we are and what we stand for, which is why countering it is something we must all be committed to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Very wise words. Thank you. Now we'll hear from Lord Alton. Lord Alton is the co-chair of the APPG for Pakistan and a member of the APPG for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. He's a powerful advocate in the House of Lords for freedom of religion. He will speak on the key recommendations from our APPG report. Lord Alton.
Thank you, Siobhan. And may I start by saying what a pleasure, privilege it's been serving as a member of the APPG during the inquiry. Hatred of none and love of all is a pretty good maxim by which to live your life. But that love and willingness to live in peace alongside others has too often been repaid with hatred, with intolerance, harassment, discrimination, and as we have heard this evening, outright persecution, even murder. We've been reminded of the cold-blooded killing 4 years ago of Asad Shah, the Glasgow shopkeeper. Tanvir Ahmed, his murderer, admired Mumtaz Qadri. It was Qadri who assassinated the courageous governor of Punjab, Saman Taseer, whose remarkable son we've heard from tonight. His father had worked with Shahbaz, the Minister for Minorities, on proposals to reform the blasphemy laws and to promote a culture of peaceful coexistence. It's notable that Bhatti's murderer has never been brought to justice. If you can't bring to justice someone who murders a government minister, what chance has anybody else got? On sentencing Ahmed to life imprisonment, Judge Lady Ray said that Mr. Shah was, and I quote her, a peaceful and peace-loving man and a family man who went out of his way to show respect for those of any faith. She said his murder was, again I quote, an appalling display of merciless violence, and told Ahmed that he was responsible for the barbaric, premeditated, and wholly unjustified killing of a much-loved man who was a pillar of the local community. Shahbaz Taseer told our inquiry when he was giving us evidence that Mumtaz Qadri, who shot my father, silenced an entire country, created an atmosphere of fear. It is a very dangerous atmosphere where your own bodyguard, who is supposed to protect you, puts 26 bullets in your back because you believe that a woman should not be rotting in jail. In this dangerous atmosphere of fear, Ahmadi mosques have been demolished, houses and businesses set on fire, leaflets and hate speech rampant, some calling Ahmadis liable to be killed, with Ahmadis subject to brutal target killing, and even as we heard earlier, the digging up of graves of children and the desecration of cemeteries. One of the witnesses told our inquiry that, and again I quote, persecution is so rife that it's been described as being akin to an impending genocide. This has been going on year after year, and it's been accompanied by shocking silence and apparent indifference. In 2011 in Parliament, I raised the murder of 98 defenceless Ahmadis killed in Lahore while they were at prayer. At the time, the Asian Human Rights Commission said the killing was systematic and targeted, that, I quote, extremists openly planned to kill hundreds of Ahmadis while the government turns a blind eye. I pointed to a culture of impunity with no prosecution of perpetrators over the previous 15 years of violent and often fatal attacks. That was, remember, 2011. And then in 2015, I visited the detention centres in Southeast Asia, where fleeing Ahmadis and Christians are caged like wild animals, and called for the resettlement of families, some of whom have been stranded for years. In 2019, after a visit to Pakistan with Jim Shannon, with whom I'm co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Pakistan minorities, I called for a review of the £383,000 in British taxpayers' money, which we spend each and every single day in aid to Pakistan. £383,000 a day, £2.8 billion over 20 years. But the religion-blind mantra of DFID has meant that it rarely reaches the people who are targeted by these campaigns of hatred. It's difficult to see how this funding is used as leverage or to tip the scales of justice. That impression was reinforced during the course of the inquiry, which has led to this important report. We heard shocking accounts which require action, primarily by the government of Pakistan, but there are things which the UK government and the international community can do as well. For instance, on page 123, the report calls on the UK government to prevent hate preachers from entering the UK, preventing anti-Ahmadi hate in the UK, and allowing Ahmadi refugees to settle here. It calls on the Pakistan government to restore the voting rights of Ahmadi Muslims and to release Ahmadi prisoners currently on death row. And it also makes recommendations to the judiciary of Pakistan. Senior judicial figures, some of whom I met when I was in Pakistan and hold in very high regard, should study recommendation 14, which looks at how the crime reporting process can easily be manipulated by extremist mobs to charge Ahmadi Muslims with blasphemy. The decision-making process of FIR complaints should be centralized and overseen by a specially trained regional unit rather than local police stations. And we must combat hatred and violence wherever it emerges. As recently as July the 3rd, I asked a parliamentary question about the support voiced by a Pakistan state minister for an anti-Ahmadiyya Twitter campaign which called for Ahmadis to be punished by death. But hatred has its origins in attitudes inculcated in the cradle. As Dr. Mohammed Abu Salam told us during the hearings, this hatred against the minorities originates and is further strengthened by the textbooks. The school books present a twisted, narrow-minded and distorted worldview. Witnesses told us that, I quote, persecution is so rife that it's been described as being akin to an impending genocide. That persecution is across the board, denying them their fundamental rights. Siobhan, Pakistan must return to its foundation principles, those of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. In 1948, when Pakistan was founded, it also signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as Sarah reminded us a few moments ago, this surely is about upholding the rights and the dignity of every human being. Article 18 of the 1948 Universal Declaration demands the right of every person to believe, not to believe, or to change their belief. And that right and many of the other 30 rights in the 1948 Declaration are violated against Ahmadis each and every single day. I hope that this report will help Pakistan make the journey back to its origins, to its roots, and to the founding principles of Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Thank you very much, Lord Alton. We now move to Lord Ahmed. Lord Ahmed serves as the Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth and as Minister for Human Rights. He previously also served as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. He will provide a response on behalf of Her Majesty's Government. Lord Ahmed.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I've been listening very carefully to the various contributions, and they resonate very strongly with me for obvious reasons. However, it would be remiss of me not to start by first of all thanking the APPG for what is a both constructive but a necessary report at this time. The COVID crisis around the world, the pandemic as it stands, has been used as a means to usurp the rights of so many vulnerable communities. And the Ahmadiyya Muslim community suffers a strange irony in Pakistan, that rather than not wanting support, they have been seeking to provide support to vulnerable minorities. But the state of play in Pakistan is such that even that right to help others has been denied to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Therefore, I welcome the recommendations that have been made, and I look forward to working with the APPG and other key parliamentarians on seeing how best we can take the recommendations forward, particularly as Lord Alton suggested so rightly, that there is much that we can do ourselves as the United Kingdom government. And David will know from discussions we've had very recently about some of the reviews I've already initiated on the specific point of educational support and funding in Pakistan. We want to support the most vulnerable, but it must be done in a non-discriminatory fashion, and we must dig deeper as to who is doing the teaching and what is being taught. I also, what Sarah said, resonated very strongly with me. I remember some of the debates I had when I was a Home Office Minister along this very vexed issue of defining extremism. What is violent extremism? What is extremism? Is there any extremism which should be permissible in the United Kingdom? The short answer is absolutely not. And we need to stand united to ensure that we work towards eradication of extremism, which lays the seed of terrorism in our own country. The right to have or practice a faith or belief, or not have any religious belief, is a fundamental human right. And the protection of the rights of religious communities is of great importance to me as Her Majesty's government responsible and the minister responsible for human rights. But there's a more poignant reason and a personal reason. No one perhaps has experienced the kind of challenge, and this probably states the challenge we all face. I'm a minister of Her Majesty's governments. I'm the minister for South Asia. I'm the minister for human rights. Yet when I went to Pakistan and returned, one of the fire-band imams stood on a perch, addressed 1 million people and said, how dare the Pakistani government accord Her Majesty's government minister, who is an Ahmadi Muslim, the protocol that he was extended. We should not be deterred from that. Recently, I've had groups visiting here. Again, Lord Alton is aware of that. They presented me with a Holy Quran. We discussed the communities that are persecuted, including Christians, Hindus, and yes, Ahmadi Muslims, on which I gave personal insights. Their quote to me was, "You're a great champion of human rights. You're a great champion of religion. You're a great champion of Islam." As soon as there was a photograph printed of that meeting, their denial was, "We didn't know he was off it," because we didn't, of course, it's the British government. They have no Muslims serving in Her Majesty's government. You know what? I'm proud to be, at the moment, I am the only Muslim serving in Her Majesty's government, and I am an Ahmadi Muslim. Perhaps that reflects poignantly that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is the oldest established Muslim community in the United Kingdom. But in turning to the recommendations, and Pakistan specifically, the situation is grave. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community, a community that helped establish a multi-religious, a multifaceted, and open human rights where religious freedoms could be protected as a country, a progressive Islamic state, today receives the brunt of the religious extremists. And with other communities, such as the Christian communities that people such as John and David and others have talked about, the situation of the Ahmadi Muslim community in Pakistan is particularly grave because they're denied another fundamental human right, the right to vote. The only way they can vote in an election is to deny their own faith. What kind of choice is that? And I assure you, as a minister, of course, in the true measures of British diplomacy, I am balanced, I am measured. I use my most dulcet and careful tones in my exchanges with the Pakistani administration. But that doesn't prevent me from stating the absolute fundamentals. That how can it be right that the country that claims to be progressive, that is steeped in Islamic traditions, is steeped in traditions of a faith which calls for the rights and protections and sustainable rights and protections of all communities, should have degenerated to the situation that we now see in Pakistan. And the situation for all minority religious communities in Pakistan, including Ahmadiyya communities, is very, very serious. I had recently, only last week, a meeting with the Minister of Human Rights, Shireen Mazari, where we talked quite candidly about the situation which is currently faced in Pakistan, including in a recent roundtable I did with representatives of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Fareed Ahmed, who's on the line, as well as other aid agencies that work, including Humanity First, that are linked, about the denial of aid, the appalling situation that we have in Pakistan. And therefore it is right that we continue to force the agenda. Therefore, I've been pleased that the government has really made freedom of religion or belief a key priority through the envoy that I was, which is a role now covered by a colleague of mine, Rahman Chisti, as well as the focus we brought in international fora, such as the Human Rights Council, which Lord Alton will be well versed with, in ensuring that we call out abuses of human rights across the piece, no matter who the country is. But at the same time, I would also add that I agree that what happens in Pakistan translates onto our streets here. Fiyaz mentioned it very poignantly. So in conclusion, and I do look forward genuinely, Siobhan, in engaging with you, I know, and I pay tribute to your constant raising of the issue, particularly on the educational discrimination we see in Pakistan. I'm grateful to the APG of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community to continue to make sure this agenda remains at the forefront of our mind as Her Majesty's government. You know what? Pakistan is a partner. There are many within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community who have strong diaspora links with Pakistan. They genuinely care about the United Kingdom. They genuinely care about Pakistan. Yet they're even denied that right to even care for a country that many regard as their ancestral home. Therefore, it's right that we come together. The government will continue to pursue the fundamental pillars of equality, fairness, and respect. And in standing up for this is to speak up for the rights of all. I often say my biggest test as Human Rights Minister is not just to speak in defense and protection and strengthening the cause of the community that I'm proud to be a member of, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. It's how I articulate and stand up for the views of others. That is the greatest test of our human rights, when we stand up for the beliefs and rights of others. And in that way, on behalf of my faith, my community of Ahmadiyya Muslim community, I thank all my colleagues across Parliament and NGOs working in this respect, to Fiyaz, to Sarah, and others who stand up and speak up for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. I am grateful and I look forward to working with you. And my views, I know, and I share with you, are quite formally, specifically, at times personally articulated to the Prime Minister, who knows full well the massive contributions that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community makes here in the United Kingdom and across the world. Thanks, Siobhan.
Thank you, Tariq. And can I apologise to everybody? I haven't kept us quite to time, but we're not too far off, given the great speeches and the passion that people have displayed and the knowledge people have displayed this evening. Our final speaker is Rafiq Hayat. Rafiq is the National President of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community UK. He oversees the UK's chapter's 138 branches and nearly 30,000 members. He has overseen the UK's community Stop the Persecution campaign, the United Against Extremism campaign, and the Muslims for Peace campaign that has reached millions across the UK. Rafiq.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Respected Chair Siobhan McDonough, respected members of the Parliamentary APPG, honourable speakers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the APPG for this very important report that has been published. And we hope that this report will bring some peace in the society that we live in. And if all the relevant governments take action, I believe this is very much possible during the next few years. Now, we've heard a range of issues faced by Ahmadis and other communities in Pakistan. The report provides a comprehensive account of the history of the persecution, but this is sadly a live issue even today in Pakistan and other countries such as Algeria, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. Ahmadis are not in any way against Pakistan. On the contrary, Ahmadis play a pivotal role in the service of the country, as the report highlights. Indeed, our community was very instrumental in the creation of Pakistan, and the first foreign minister of Pakistan, Sir Chaudhry Zafrullah Khan, was a member of our community. Our sole desire is that Pakistan should prosper and have peace. And the foundation for that is justice and for all its citizens to have equal rights. Sadly, Ahmadi Muslims are denied human rights and freedom of religion to the extent that life has become intolerable for Ahmadi Muslims living in Pakistan. Recent examples that you've heard earlier, speakers talk about them. is the desecration of graves in Gujranwala by violent mobs encouraged through extremist rhetoric of the mullahs. The banning by Pakistan broadcaster regulator, PEMRA, of all Ahmadi channels. The arrest of Ahmadis such as Ramzan Bibi on false allegations of blasphemy. This hate is also in other countries, unfortunately. In Bangladesh, clerics dug up, as you heard earlier, the body of a newly born baby girl and left on the roadside for them to go and bury the child somewhere else. In Pakistan, we are targeted by laws. How can such situation prevail in the 21st century? As we have seen, if you target one community, then all communities suffer, as has been the case in Pakistan with Christians, Shia Muslims, and Hindus. And the hate spread, and the reports show that it has reached these shores as well. The same organizations and preachers in Pakistan who promote anti-Ahmadiyya hate, such as Khatm-e-Nubuwwat, have been allowed into the United Kingdom to preach. In October 2017, BBC Radio 4 broadcast a documentary examining the campaigns of anti-Ahmadi Muslim hatred being run in Urdu language newspapers in the UK. In schools and universities in the UK, Ahmadi Muslims experience prejudice and pressure from other Muslim students. Hate preachers with publicized records of anti-Ahmadi hatred have been allowed into the UK. Hate preaching organizations in Pakistan have been allowed to set up and registered as UK charities. Recent live example is how we've been denied membership by Interfaith Scotland because other Muslims in Scotland do not recognize us as Muslims. We have similar issues with Sacre in Birmingham. So this is a real issue for us here in the UK. Also, with the rise of online hate, we need the government's proposed new online harm regulator to have real teeth and not just brush such issues aside. So we must act for such prosecution in affecting all communities in Pakistan. It has destroyed the peace of the country, and now it is here in the UK too. It's also causing the suffering of thousands of refugees who are stranded in camps and detention centers. Having been recognized as people in fear for their life, they need to be resettled. We cannot sit idle. The wide range of support shown in the report for the launch today is heartwarming, and I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed. And I'm not sure how much clearer we can be to make collective case for the action. Now it is the turn of the government and international communities to raise the challenge. The goal is to help Pakistan live up to its noble vision of its founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who said that there would be complete separation of religion and state so that there is peace for all. The recommendations detail how we can help Pakistan achieve peace, and we should now hold the UK government to account for its actions on the recommendations to see that its commitments to the freedom of religion and human rights is the one that results in action and real change, and not just offer of hope. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone, particularly Siobhan, for the hard work they've put into this report. May God bless you all. May God bless the work that you've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafiq. As our last contribution, we're just going back to Fareed to read the statement of support that we had a technical glitch with right at the very beginning. But may I thank everybody for their contribution tonight, and hope that everybody watching it felt that it was useful and taught them something that they might already not already know. Thank you, Fareed.
Thank you, Siobhan. This is a special message from His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, for the launch of the All-Party Parliamentary Group report. His Holiness says, I am pleased to learn that the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has completed its report on human rights and religious freedom, and it is now being officially launched. Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan have been persecuted and victimized in Pakistan for many decades. To cite a very recent example, last week, dozens of gravestones of Ahmadi Muslims were demolished by religious extremists in a village in Pakistan after extremist clerics had complained that the gravestones contained Islamic terminology. All of this was done in the presence of members of the local police. Where such vile acts are targeting Ahmadi Muslims and the perpetual denial of our religious freedom are a means of grief to us, we also believe it has a wider impact on society at large. Paramount to the success and progress of any nation is the principle of non-discrimination, and only those societies can truly progress in which all citizens are treated equally. Certainly, this was the noble vision laid out by the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and remains the true pathway to peace in any nation or society. In terms of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we will always respond to persecution we face with patience and by turning to God Almighty in prayer. We do not seek any special treatment or favors. Rather, our only desire is for the people of all faiths and beliefs to live side by side in peace and harmony, as taught by the Holy Quran, which unequivocally states there should be no compulsion in religion, chapter 2, verse 257. Furthermore, during his life, the holy founder of Islam, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, set a timeless and unparalleled example of religious freedom and plurality. Upon being elected as the head of state in Medina, he pronounced that every person was free to practice their faith and beliefs without fear of persecution or injustice. Consequently, it is our contention that freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, and true justice are the cornerstones for peace in all parts of the world. In light of this, I am extremely appreciative of the fact that the report you are launching today calls for religious freedom for all people, irrespective of their caste, creed, or color. Certainly, in the struggle for universal human rights, we stand shoulder to shoulder with all those who seek to help the victims of injustice and oppression. Despite the persecution we face in Pakistan and the myriad of restrictions placed upon us, Ahmadi Muslims continue to serve the nation with the spirit of love and selflessness and devotion, as loyalty to one's nation is an inherent part of Islamic faith. For example, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Pakistan has established many humanitarian projects and programs in order to serve the underprivileged and the vulnerable members of society. We earnestly desire for Pakistan to prosper and to succeed. Indeed, we want all countries to flourish, and to achieve this, the human rights of all people must be upheld and protected. Every nation and every individual must play their role in the cause of peace, so that the world we bequeath to our children and future generations is a world of peace and prosperity. Finally, I wish to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to all members of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for your continued support and efforts. I pray that the launch of the report is successful and blessed in all respects, and may it fulfill its objectives. May Allah the Almighty bless you all for your efforts and services in the cause of peace. Ameen. With best wishes and prayers, yours sincerely, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih V, head of the worldwide Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Thank you, Fareed, and please thank His Holiness for his very special message. I'd like to thank everybody. We've had 700 people listening today, many of them on YouTube. A link to download the report will now be on the screen and be emailed to each attendee personally. Thank you very much for your attendance.